Emma had always been a cautious person. She followed the rules, stuck to a routine, and never took any unnecessary risks. She lived a comfortable but predictable life, and she was happy with it. But deep down, she always wondered what it would be like to take a chance and live life to the fullest. One day, Emma's life took an unexpected turn when she met Max. They were introduced at a friend's party, and Emma was immediately drawn to him. Max was the complete opposite of Emma. He was spontaneous, adventurous, and lived life on the edge. He had a way of making her feel alive in a way she never had before. As they started dating, Emma found herself stepping out of her comfort zone. Max took her on adventures she never would have dared to try before, like bungee jumping, whitewater rafting, and exploring abandoned buildings. He showed her a side of life she never knew existed, and Emma was hooked. But as their relationship progressed, Emma began to realize that Max had a darker side. He was always getting into trouble, and he had a tendency to push things too far. He would drive recklessly, steal things for fun, and often got into fights. At first, Emma tried to ignore these red flags, but eventually, they caught up with Max. He was arrested for stealing a car and sent to jail. Emma was devastated, and she didn't know what to do. After a few weeks, Max's friends convinced Emma to help break him out of jail. She was hesitant, but she loved him and couldn't bear the thought of him being behind bars. They hatched a plan, and Emma agreed to help. They managed to get Max out of jail, and they went on the run together. They drove across the country, staying in seedy motels and hiding from the law. Emma knew what they were doing was wrong, but she couldn't help feeling alive and free for the first time in her life. Max made her feel like she was living in a movie, and she was swept up in the thrill of it all. But eventually, they were caught. Emma was arrested and charged with aiding and abetting a criminal. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison, with no chance of parole. Emma's first few weeks in prison were a blur of fear and confusion. She was surrounded by hardened criminals, and she felt like a fish out of water. The days were long, the food was terrible, and she missed Max more than anything. As time went on, Emma adjusted to life in prison, but the sadness never went away. She spent her days working in the laundry room, scrubbing clothes until her hands were raw. At night, she lay in her bunk, staring up at the ceiling, thinking about Max and what could have been. The worst part of it all was the loneliness. Emma had never felt so isolated in her life. She missed her friends and family, and she longed for human connection. She made a few friends in prison, but she knew she would never see them again once she was released. As the months turned into years, Emma's sadness turned into resignation. She knew she had made a mistake, and she was paying the price for it. She tried to stay positive, but it was hard. She missed Max more than anything, but she knew she would never see him again. He was still out there, living his life, while she was stuck in prison. In the end, Emma served her full sentence and was released from prison. She walked out the gates with a sense of freedom she had never felt before, but also a profound sense of loss. She had lost 3 years of her life, and she would never get them back. She had lost her freedom, her independence, and her sense of self. When she got out of prison, Emma had no one to turn to. Her family and friends had all moved on with their lives, and she had no job or money. She was alone in the world, and she didn't know where to go or what to do. For months, Emma struggled to get back on her feet. She applied for jobs, but no one would hire an ex-con. She tried to reconnect with her old friends, but they were wary of her after what had happened. She felt like an outsider in her own life, and she didn't know how to fix it. One day, while walking through the park, Emma ran into an old acquaintance. His name was David, and they had gone to high school together. They struck up a conversation, and Emma found herself opening up to him about everything that had happened. To her surprise, David didn't judge her. He listened to her story with compassion and understanding. He offered her a place to stay and a job at his coffee shop. Emma was hesitant at first, but she had no other options. Working at the coffee shop was a challenge for Emma, but it was also a source of comfort. She enjoyed the routine, the familiar faces, and the feeling of being part of something. David was a good boss, and he treated her with kindness and respect. As time went on, Emma started to feel like she was building a new life for herself. She had a job, a place to live, and a few new friends. But the sadness was always there, lurking in the background. One day, while walking home from work, Emma heard a familiar voice behind her. She turned around and saw Max, standing there with a sheepish expression on his face. He looked older and more worn than she remembered, but it was definitely him. Emma's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know what to do or say. Max had been the love of her life, but he had also been the cause of all her pain and suffering. Max looked at her for a long moment, and then he spoke. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm so sorry for everything." Emma felt a surge of emotions wash over her: anger, hurt, confusion, and most of all, sadness. She had loved Max with all her heart, but he had betrayed her in the worst way possible. She looked at him for a long moment, trying to process her feelings. And then, unexpectedly, she found herself feeling sorry for him. He looked so lost and broken, like he had been through hell and back. Without thinking, Emma stepped forward and hugged Max. He wrapped his arms around her, and they stood there in the middle of the street, holding each other. For a moment, it felt like everything was right in the world again. But then the reality of their situation hit Emma. She had moved on, and Max was still stuck in the past. She couldn't go back to him, no matter how much she still loved him. With a heavy heart, Emma pulled away from Max. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I can't do this." And then she turned and walked away, leaving Max standing there in the middle of the street. As Emma walked home, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had finally let go of the past, and she was ready to move on with her life. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she was strong enough to face it.